What's up everybody, this is Master Eon Gamer. Jeff Kaplan has been crazy busy on the Overwatch forums this evening and has been dropping tons of information about Overwatch 2's PvE cinematics, the current issues of role queue, and even the possibility of transitioning from a 2-2-2 team composition to a 1-3-2 team composition. So without further ado, let's jump right on in. First, I want to start with a couple of the more quick topics before we get onto the massive post Jeff made talking about 1-3-2 compositions. His first couple posts had to do with Overwatch 2 in response to the concern that the Overwatch 2 Rio mission cinematic felt too short. In response to this, Jeff said, both the introduction and outro that we showed at BlizzCon were not the final pieces. The planned introduction is a little bit longer. The planned outro, which is still in development and we were reviewing yesterday, is much longer and not intended to be a cliffhanger. Spoiler alert, Lucio doesn't die. For BlizzCon, we could only final so many shots, so we did an abbreviated cliffhanger for the demo. The final piece is much longer and shows Lucio's rescue as well as more awesome story stuff that sets up the next mission. We appreciate the feedback and are glad you're asking for more and not less. Jeff then later followed this up by responding to a follow-up question asking if every mission in Overwatch 2 is going to have an intro and outro by saying, yes, not all will be the same lengths or carry the same level of importance, but for now the plan is, yes, intro/outro for all story missions. So this was just an interesting thing for Jeff to point out, the idea that the animated shorts, they're not really animated shorts, they're more like cinematics because they're rendered within the game's engine. The cinematics are apparently going to be more substantial than what we saw for Rio at BlizzCon 2019. Now, I always appreciate more story and I love seeing the characters in these just even in-game cinematics, but on the other hand, you have to consider the fact that most people are just ultimately going to end up skipping these cinematics anyways. I mean, how many times did you watch the cinematic for Storm Rising or Retribution? Once, maybe twice, before you just skip it every time after that. I would much rather get more substantial, well thought out sort of story bits in a separate format of sorts, such as the animated shorts or the comics or whatever. But again, I understand why they have them. It's a great way to build up the hype of the mission you're about to play. And for people who don't really focus much on the sort of external story bits, again, like the comics, short stories, animated shorts, it gives them just a bit of context when they're playing the game to know what's really going on. But if nothing else, it's just nice to see Jeff giving us a bit of correspondence regarding this, and I certainly am hyped to see what sort of cinematics we end up getting with the various missions that are going to end up being in-game. Now, finally getting on to the massive post about role queue. I'm not actually going to read through all of this because if I did, this video would probably be more than half an hour long. Rather, I want to pick out important sort of topics and ideas he expresses in this massive post of his and give my thoughts on it, which are particularly interesting to me because a lot of these actually have to do with tank players and tank mains specifically. So apparently, internally, Blizzard has been playtesting the 1 tank 3 damage 2 support team composition for 2 months at this point, basically as an experiment to see whether or not it would be viable and to see basically what sort of interesting strategies and behaviors players exhibit while in this format. One of the biggest things which stuck out to them is the impact this would have on off tanks, particularly heroes like D.Va, Zarya, and Roadhog, who don't typically function well as tanks when they're the only tank. They work best as a sort of complement to a main tank or some hero with a barrier, and so if you only have 1 tank on your team, these off tanks don't really serve proper roles. Now, Jeff addresses this and says that the options would basically be to either convert these existing off tanks into being more similar to existing main tanks on an individual basis, or to shift them more into the role of being DPS heroes. Specifically, he gave the example of how internally they're testing with a version of Roadhog who only has 400 health, doesn't get damage reduction from Take a Breather and has changes to his scrap gun so that he fits better as a DPS character. He does specify that these changes aren't going to be going through, at least not in like the standard sense. Maybe if there is some sort of overwhelming change they end up implementing, then we'll see something like this, but for the time being, Roadhog isn't going to be changed. Another big thing he brought up was the impact on tank players when you only have one per team instead of two. Jeff talked about how there's an immense amount of pressure which then shifts to that single player as they're solely responsible essentially for making space for their team. A lot of the players in the experiment he mentions seem to not enjoy this added pressure as it made the role overall more stressful, which is something that personally I would have to agree with. I feel like tank players as is already suffer quite a bit from this sort of expectation mindset where other players always want you to have a barrier and they need to have the proper off tank for whichever main tank you're playing. There's already quite a bit of just expectation when it comes to tanks, and so limiting the number of tank players from 2 to 1 then shifts all that pressure onto whichever single person is playing tank. And that is essentially exactly what they seem to have seen internally when they were running these 3-2-1 comp tests. Jeff also mentioned that some people actually enjoyed this added pressure as they liked being the team's one main tank, which, good for them I guess. I don't think I would be one of those people though. I definitely enjoy the tanks as they work now, and I actually think with role queue, with the recent barrier changes, and just the overall state of tanks at this very point in time are actually really, really good. Tanks are really well balanced, they're really fun to play, so hearing them talk about these experiments personally makes me nervous. I know they're not going to actually just go ahead and implement this, so I'm not worried about that, but the idea of making tanks such a much more pressurizing role to play and subjecting them to even more expectation basically from their teammates, I don't think would be a good thing. Inevitably, this would result in players shifting away from playing tanks, which is again something that Jeff actually mentioned. He said that people who typically flexed between tank and support players shifted to exclusively playing support under this system of 3-2-1 as the one tank on the team ended up having too much pressure on them. So I absolutely think we would end up seeing that on the general live servers if this ever were to be introduced, as most people would just probably shift to the now more open DPS queue, which is going to have room for 3 DPS per team instead of 2, but because so many people who would shift from tank to DPS, I think that you might actually see a bit of a counterintuitive effect there, where by making these changes, even less people end up wanting to play tank. Naturally, many of them are going to shift to DPS, and then you're going to still end up with the issue of DPS queue times being insanely high, even with more DPS per team than any other role. A bit on the flip side though, Jeff did say that the experience for support and DPS players were actually a bit more positive, where the support players in general were mixed, but some people found it much more enjoyable and that they weren't constantly tasked with just healing these big health bars. They had a bit more freedom with jumping around to heal the different DPS players, and maybe even contribute in some other ways. Really, it just came down to each specific player's opinions. Damage players, in comparison, seem to have an overall positive experience from this, not only because of the queue time being significantly shorter, but the amount of possible variety when it comes to team composition for DPS seemed to just make things overall more enjoyable for them, mostly just because of the added freedom. He said that this led to the game feeling much more like a traditional FPS, where there's less barriers and damage mitigation, but that it also detracted significantly from team play, which again was something that was seen as either a positive or a negative depending on the specific player. Some people enjoy the team play aspect and the ability to work with other people in order to get an advantage, whereas some others just enjoyed playing for themselves, doing well on a certain hero they enjoy, and feeling like they're having fun and contributing even if the team overall doesn't necessarily do well. Jeff does go on to talk about how, in general, having a 3-2-1 structure overall made the game a lot more just chaotic, but in a fun way, where it felt a bit like old Overwatch, where things weren't quite as structured and you could have much more diversity in the DPS heroes on your team. And then Jeff even went on to make the comparison of how technically up until role queue was a thing, it was normal to see 1 tank and 3 DPS, or no tanks and 5 DPS. And personally, I think this is just an interesting reflection to consider. Up until just this past summer, there was no role queue, and while a lot of people do still seem to not entirely still be on board with role queue, some people think the queue time issues are just too extreme and they wish that role queue wasn't a thing. I think overall, if we went back to pre-role queue at this point, most people would be upset. I know I would be upset for sure, but even a lot of people who play like DPS heroes and stuff, I'm not convinced that they would particularly like having those faster queue times if it means 6 DPS. Ultimately, Jeff concludes his post by saying that they're not confident that switching role queue from 2-2-2 to 3-2-1 is the right thing to do. It sounds like they're still very intrigued by it, however, and are considering finding ways to implement it as a sort of experimental game mode, possibly as something that would come to the arcade, just so that more people on live servers can actually get to experiment with this new structure without sacrificing the existing 2-2-2, which already, in all honesty, works pretty well. I do recommend that you read the entire post he makes for yourself. Again, I was going to read it out here and give my individual thoughts on each paragraph, but that literally would have taken forever. So I just decided to have a sort of quick review that would be much quicker. But for the most part, I do agree with most of what Jeff says. He brings up some interesting observations and experiments they've had, but ultimately it sounds like the impact of switching it to 3-2-1 wouldn't necessarily be a net benefit to the game, to the degree that it doesn't seem worthwhile to risk trying to implement it. And again, I gave my thoughts about how, as a tank player, I think this would actually be really, really unfun, but I'm sure there are a lot of other people who would actually enjoy this, and I'm definitely very interested to hear what you guys have to say about it in the comments down below. Before I wrap up, there was also one follow-up post that Jeff made, where somebody asked about the possibility of switching it to 2-3-2, where you have 7 players per team instead of 6, and Jeff responded saying, exceeding 12 players per match would cause significant technical challenges. We're highly optimized towards 12 right now. Experimenting with less than 12 is more realistic. It's not that we cannot do it, it's that the cost would be extremely high. Now this I absolutely agree with. You can tell that Overwatch is designed in such a way that adding more people per team is just a messy thing that it's not designed or balanced at all to be able to do. I mean, heck, even adding in Bob as like a pseudo 7th character apparently had a lot of technical challenges involved with it. So yeah, the idea of adding more than 6 people per team or 12 per match, I don't think is a very realistic approach, unfortunately, but that would be a very interesting thing. And maybe in the future that could be something they'll experiment with, because that sounds like a fun possibility. Also very chaotic. Anyways, that'll do it for this massive amount of information Jeff Kaplan just dropped on us. Again, be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, what you think about the possibility of switching 2-2-2 to 3-2-1, as well as any of the other things he talked about regarding Overwatch 2 and its cinematics. As always, be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and share it with a friend if you really liked it. Subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and hit up the bell to never miss any of my future Overwatch news and content. This is Master Ian Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.